Dune Prophecy, the first episode, premiered last night on HBO Max. This is in the timeline, I guess, of the Denis Villeneuve Dune Part 1 and 2. It's set 10,000 years in the past from that timeline, from the birth of Paul Atreides. We have all seen the show, and I talked about it last week, but I want to hear what you guys think. Please feel free to jump in. I want to get everybody's thoughts, and we'll go around the horn here. But I'm going to hold my thoughts for at the end. What do you guys think?
It's a mixed bag for me.
Yeah, I want to.
I was struggling, man. I was struggling with this. Again, let Elaine go. Let Elaine go first,
please.
It's a mixed bag for me. There are some really cool lore things in there that were really fun to think about, and I think have a lot of potential. But unfortunately, I think it's watered down by a lot of young adult romantasy, fan fiction-y kind of scenes that don't really seem. I feel like I'm watching a different show. It really threw off the tone for me. So I think general audiences as well will feel like it's a mixed bag too. It's just I just get that general feeling. We go from philosophical sci-fi in one scene to like a coming of age drama. In the next, it's kind of was a bit jarring, but there is some really cool things in here that I am really excited to think about and speculate about for future lore videos. But yeah, I don't.
Jump in. We got to hear from everyone.
Okay, I'll say this. On a writing standpoint, it's lacking a hook in that first episode. There is nothing there for your average person with showing curiosity into this to make them go, "Ooh, that's interesting." Their hook technically came at the very end of the first episode, which I felt a disservice to.
Yeah, I agree with that. The ending was like exciting.
I fell asleep in the middle of it when Mark Strong's talking about marrying his daughter, and then I had to wake up and rewatch that again because it's
marrying her off.
Yes, sorry, he's not actually marrying her. What? that would have made the show a bit more interesting. But I will say this: the costumes are great. Some of the special effects are fantastic. I haven't read a whole lot of the Brian Herbert stuff, but I felt like the brutalistic architectural style for the Imperium was a little in conflict with what I would have envisioned it to be, especially so recently after the Butlerian Jihad. I figured it would probably be a little bit more ostentatious, and it kind of felt a little bit simple. But that's just my personal aesthetic there.
The Butlerian Jihad of Chris was like, oh, I saw the first, they show it, and then I show it, and it's like 3 tripods shooting a particle beam, and then they get blown up by a grenade, and that was the Butlerian Jihad.
They made it look
like
yeah, that was
it wasn't made for me. I don't think. When I was watching everything with the Bene Gesserit, all my alarm and warning signals go off if I feel like I'm watching the Acolyte of with the Commune, and then everything else is space, Game of Thrones, which I like Travis Fimmel and Mark Strong, but yeah, in every way it wasn't made for me.
And Danica, you know, I know you're a huge Dune fan. We saw Dune Part 2 together. You have dressed. You were a sandworm once, weren't you?
Oh yes, I was. I was the goddess emperor.
Right.
So I was like, I was
cool.
God Empress of Dune.
There you go.
Yeah.
And you have your Dune book club, which I've seen on YouTube. Which I highly recommend.
Yes.
What do you think about this first episode?
Oof, you know, I'm agreeing with what everybody else is saying. It makes me feel better that you guys are also saying this because I felt that it was, you know, it didn't have a hook for me. I wasn't really connecting with any of the characters. I wasn't really excited about any of the storylines they had going. I was really confused. It's like we haven't had Dune on TV since the sci-fi miniseries, and so I will say it's an upgrade from the sci-fi miniseries. The costuming looks great. There are some really good effects. There's some good stuff going on, like the sandworm stuff. I was like, ooh, you know, that looks great. But it just wasn't hitting for me. And I'm an Orthodox Herbertian, so like I don't read any of the Brian Herbert Kevin J. Anderson stuff. And so I'm not sure, like, I was confused too. I was like, this is so soon after the Butlerian Jihad, and they're already like mining spice. And then, but are there Reverend Mothers? Like, have they figured out how to take the water of life? I know
to be developed really quickly.
They developed really quickly, but I don't think they're Reverend. I was just confused by a lot of stuff in it, and there was just a lot of like, I don't know, some dumb shit in there. Like that guy. Can I do some? Can I do spoilers at all? Or
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah, why
not?
not?
I'm not gonna spoil anything, but there's this guy and he's just like rolling around and he like rolls up on the emperor at afterwards, and it's just like, hey, what's up? And has this private conversation with the emperor, and it's like there's no guards or like this guy can
he
just.
was a highly decorated soldier with 12 tours, and that's the only reason they left him alone. Yeah.
To just go around the
convenient.
palace and then also go to talk to the little princeling or the richesse or richese, however they say it. I've heard richesse in the past. I was like, where are the guards? Like nobody's guarding any of these people. Like this guy could just roll around.
Very empty.
And I didn't love the Bene Gesserit too, where you have the princess and she's gonna go join, and it's like she's old enough to be having sex with her sword master. You have to be like, they take you when you're like 5 or like 3. And I know that this is a proto Bene Gesserit, like they're still forming, but I just feel like if you're already like of age, like it's too late to become a sister. Like that.
It's like a Jedi thing where you can't have an identity beforehand because you need to be indoctrinated.
Yes.
The right way. Yeah.
Yes. Well, the Bene Gesserit are based off of the Jesuits. And it's like, get them while they're young and they're yours forever. And they also, it's like being a gymnast too. It's like, okay, you can't decide to be a gymnast or a ballerina when you're 20. It's too late. Your bones have set. Like it's
watching all this was like if everyone was right about the Jedi being corrupt and actually planning to overthrow the Republic. Like that's what the Bene Gesserit literally are. I get it. It seems interesting, but nothing made me want to watch more of it.
Yeah, I agree. And I hated like Wallach 9, where it was just very drab and bland and austere, and what the descriptions I've read of the Bene Gesserit, like home planet and stuff, it's like it's a beautiful place. It's not like, I mean, they don't live in this crazy luxury, but like it's not ugly, and it's also self-sustaining. Like they have farms, they're like cutting down their own trees, they have their own construction people, like they have a whole self-sustaining planet situation. It looks like they're just in this barren place and it's all dark and everything's black, and it's like
no sense of irony, because that's what I liked about the concept of the Bene Gesserit and then the Imperium. It's like it's glorious, it's beautiful, it's everything, and it's like, but underneath it's really dark and twisted and manipulative and it's evil. Like that's it's a basic form of storytelling. And yet in this show, we kind of get told, oh yeah, they look creepy, they look dark, they look drab because they are. It's one dimension. Yeah. None of the students interested me. And God, that Butlerian Jihad, I was like, oh, Frank Herbert is rolling in his grave with this silly shit. Like it is not a Skynet Terminator situation. Like that was not his
tripods.
Oh my Lord. I was like, no, you fucking guys. But I get it. It's like it's very watered down, and it does kind of feel like I don't know. I don't want to say a CW show, but a little bit. Isn't that Dune Club?
Sometimes,
They had a club.
nightclub.
And I'm not saying there's not bars and shit.
I kind of liked it, right? Because it shows what the populace might be doing, but not an insult to CW. It feels like television Dune.
There's not fucking techno DJs in the Dune universe. Like, I mean,
what about the drugs they were doing?
Like it was a different show at that point. Like,
yeah,
it didn't match with the rest of the show. Like we were having like political intrigue, drama, and making these secret moves behind the scenes, and then you go to nightclub and
and then there's like a Fremen bartender or something, and I was like, what? Like you.
And they were doing spice, right? Were they?
That's what I was wondering what that drug was.
Spice?
The inhaler thing.
I don't know what it
was.
Or
were they doing lines of spice?
I think this was a very risky show for HBO to do for a few reasons. Number one, Dune is a very hard IP for a normie to just jump into. You know, they did good with the movies. They did good getting normies to understand what was going on in the films. Bravo to them for that. But even the book series, right? Like you got to be hardcore to be able to dive into those books and stick with it all the way through. And
Bro,
understand.
Danica read the books and she was confused by some of the. Now, granted, she
Yeah.
said she didn't read the other ones, which apparently do influence it, as Elaine was saying. But it's
Right, but
who's going to understand this? Like,
and that gets to my point of this
Yeah.
was a risky show for HBO to do, and it's hard for us, especially coming right off the Penguin and how good that was, and just
Yeah.
how week to week you couldn't wait for Sunday night. You couldn't wait for Sunday night. This, I don't care if I see another episode. I'm good.
I'm right there with you, Dante.
Like
This is such
I
a
saw
hard
one episode.
contrast.
It was fine. It was fine.
But
right,
well made, right?
Well
Well
made.
made.
Great
Yeah.
costumes. The acting. I appreciate so many things about this episode, and I don't care.
Yeah,
I can care less
I'm
about
right there
this-
with you,
about this
man.
show.
I dipped out. Like I fell asleep just like everybody else, and then I woke up. I tried to finish it. I was like, all right, I'm gonna finish it later. And then I finished it this morning right before we went live here. And I'm just like, you know what? There was no hook. There was nothing that was bringing me in to make me want to continue watching this show. Unlike some other shows where you just join in, you don't know anything about this universe, this world, whatever they're doing, and it hooks you immediately. And you're like, okay, I can see the appeal of why this show or why this franchise has
Yeah.
been good. Let me keep watching. I just didn't get that.
The-
with this
like a show like The
Sadly,
Expanse, right?
unfortunately.
The Expanse hooked me like that
Immediately, right?
immediately.
Right.
And look, I'm not saying I'm not going to finish the show. I'm probably going to watch every episode. I'm just
Yeah.
saying that it's a hard show for a normie to invest their watching hours with.
Yeah, that's kind of how I felt going in. I've seen the movies. That's about as far as I go. And I remember the first part, the one that took place 30 years before. I found that interesting, and the idea of that the Bene Gesserit didn't trust the houses enough, and so they had to kind of infiltrate their way into it and be an influence. And then after that, when it jumped 30 years, I found myself not having enough context behind everything I'm seeing. And so I found myself having to replay things to see what I missed. And I found myself missing things a lot throughout the whole thing. And that's just frustrating. I shouldn't have to do that with a television show. And I just can't, I don't know. I feel like if I continue on, I'm just gonna get more and more lost about what's happening and who these people are.
Well, I have more to say, but I just want to say this. As a first episode, it was really not memorable.
Mhm.
When I
Yeah.
think about certain first episodes of shows, Mad Men, the introduction of Don Draper,
Mhm.
Breaking Bad, right? Just certain first
Game of Thrones.
Right. They have to
Yeah.
hook you with the characters.
That's the sole purpose of a first episode.
Desmond.
Right.
The only
Yeah.
reason I would keep watching is the Travis Fimmel character, who's got a
Yeah.
weird Heath Ledger Joker like contained madness thing going on, where it's sort of crazed.
But
I don't know what happened to him, but,
But,
yeah.
but in television, that first episode is so important because
Right.
it has
Yeah.
to fill you in on the world and as you get you excited to see the next episode. Because
Yeah.
if you're not excited to see that next episode, you're not going to see the next episode.
Well, they're trying to hook you with that thing in the end. Again, I'm not spoiling anything, but that guy, and it's like, woo, and it's like it didn't work at all. Like you see that stuff like in Lost, where it's like, oh, there's a mystery. I want to know more. And with this, I was just like, I don't care. This
You, him?
what? Like what? Okay.
And who's really the main character in this series?
Yes.
That's
one
the
on
big
the
question. I
poster.
can't answer that.
Mark Strong, Travis Fimmel, I think.
Maybe.
The daughter.
Chris,
Rob.
Yeah,
yeah,
Rob.
I haven't weighed in on this yet. I here's the thing. The original team that was making this show was scrapped and they had to go back to the
Yeah.
beginning and start with. I honestly think a show like this is beyond the people who are making it. And I'm watching this show and I'm thinking, first of all, as far as Dune goes, I am a Herbert purist. There are 6 Dune novels.
Yes.
Now I understand that Kevin Anderson and Brian Herbert, they went on and they wrote all this extra stuff.
Fan fiction.
Yeah, and the problem with it is, even though they're both, accomplished writers in their own right, they're not accomplished enough to handle the Dune universe in the way I thought it should be handled. Their imaginations just weren't up to the task. They've tried to take Herbert's concepts and bring them too down to earth and make them too archetypical, basic fantasy, science fiction, tropey stuff that happen. Whereas Herbert's novels get wilder and wilder as they go. And the reason they've endured is because nothing else is like them. Whereas as the Dune sequels have become more traditional and somebody mentioned in the chat just now, the Butlerian Jihad might have been a better place. The idea that humanity had to put down there was an uprising against AI. Why you wouldn't have started there, I don't understand, because that would have been more relevant to today than ever. But even that would have been apocryphal, because while it's mentioned, and they didn't write a whole book, Herbert didn't write a whole book about the Butlerian Jihad.
Yeah.
And I think that the problem with this show is it takes place 10,000 years. Now, think about if somebody was making a TV show about, let's just say Denis Villeneuve was making a show about today, about Earth of today. And then somebody said, we're going to do a prequel set 10,000 years in humanity's past. Where would we be? How interesting would that show be if they made a show about us 10,000 years in the past? This show might as well take place 50 years before Dune. And the interesting
technology like levels off, right? It's sort of the same technology for a while.
In 10,000 years? I mean, it's where the Dune universe wound up as opposed to if it began on Earth. They couldn't this show can't possibly work, because ultimately the themes that they're dealing with, like the Bene Gesserit seeding cultures with their own prophecies, that are fake. The whole thing, everything that happens in Dune, that the Bene Gesserit seeded, those concepts are anti-television show.
Well, the eugenics breeding program that they got going on ain't exactly made for TV either.
But at least people can understand that. I mean, but getting into that, the whole, and I think that this show, obviously the first creative team didn't know what to do with it. This creative team has tried to make it. They're trying to have their cake and eat it too. I'll still watch this because the first episode of anything just sort of kind of gets you into it. But I just don't even know if this show is the show about the Bene Gesserit that they should have made. It seems to me that they're trying to shoehorn all this other stuff in to make it more palatable to let's do everything we can to get away from the intrigue and I can't help. There's a movie playing now called Conclave, which is about the choice of a new pope. It stars Ralph Fiennes and Stanley Tucci and John Lithgow. It's very insular. It's a great thriller based on a novel. It's a terrific movie. And I'm thinking the sci-fi version of that would have been more along the lines of what they should have done. But in order, and I think it's a thankless task to try and do this kind of a show. And I understand why they went for it. I mean, in this day and age, let's do a show about an order of women that are secretly pulling the strings behind the entire Imperium. All the Landsrat are subject to what the Bene Gesserit quote unquote witches, they're awesome characters. So lean into that. But they don't. They have to have all this other traditional stuff because no one can figure out how to make a show about the Bene Gesserit order that interesting. And I look at Conclave, and who would have thought a 2-hour movie about a bunch of priests picking a pope could be that, because they leaned into the Catholicism of it all. They leaned into what they were doing. Lean into what the Bene Gesserit are. Don't try and make it like Game of Thrones or like Lord of the Rings or like this. Take what Frank Herbert gave you and extrapolate upon that. But the problem is, I don't think we have writers these days that are smart enough to do it. They're all still following the Buffy, the Joss Whedon school. Now it's Joss Whedon mixed with Game of Thrones.
I watched that movie Lucy recently with
the Luc Besson film with
the Luc Besson film, and she's like using more of her brain, and I realized, I was like, oh wait, because there was a part where she's using a little bit more and she can control her body, and I was like, that's what the Bene Gesserit are doing. They've learned to use more of their brain, and it's not a superpower, it's just they're using more
like Mentats
bandwidth, and they're able to control their bodies. And it's like, what a cool concept to get into and like expand in a show. That would be really cool. That would be
fantastic. But you need writers to understand just what you just said.
Well, and I feel like there's certain
that are well read. Sorry, Elaine, go ahead.
Oh, well, I feel like there's several teams of writers on this show, because some scenes feel like they are intelligently written, and some that are like amateur fan fiction-y. Most of the like the young scenes, the nightclub scenes, the boarding school like coming of age drama scenes don't feel like it belongs to when you have the scene with the Emperor and how the Duke of House Chess, they're trying to make a deal, and both of their Reverend Mothers are secretly conspiring together. I thought that scene was actually really cool.
Which how
and
do
really
people not
interesting.
realize that every Bene Gesserit is like in on it with each other, right? They all just happen to have a Bene Gesserit, and they don't.
Well, they've made themselves indispensable. They
Ah.
in this
Mhm.
post AI intelligent like thinking machine era, humans have tried to advance themselves to close the gap in that. But yeah, I think that this show has fallen into the trap that I've seen a lot of ensemble like fantasy shows like this do, which is they're trying to do too much and they're failing, or they're not doing as well with all the stuff they're trying to do. So I think if they minimalize the show a little bit, actually condense it to where the several main characters, which I think would be Valiant and Tula Harkonnen and the Emperor's Truesayer and the Emperor and Desmond, focus on those stories. Don't try to do all of these things at once, because it ends up just being a chaotic kind of mixed bag. And yeah, I just feel like they're doing with an ensemble like this, we just jump around way too much. And what I want to see was like in this scene, but then we jump around to characters and plot lines I do not care
was the
about.
Game
They
of
don't
Thrones
do a good
problem.
job doing.
Too
Same thing
many
with like Rings of
introductions.
Power.
Yeah.
Like they could have
Yeah.
just condensed it, and I just feel like there's two different calibers of writing, at odds with each other, and yeah, it's unfortunate.
To me, it lacks focus. I don't know. I know narratively where they're trying to go, but I don't understand the subtext behind it all. No,
I mean,
it
but
sounds. Yeah, go ahead.
with the cool like lore stuff that I was thinking, there were actually some very Frank Herbert-y things and ideas in here, and that's why it's I feel like there's some potential if they can make that grow and water that and kind of cut what's not working. When Desmond's talking about we were controlled by thinking machines, and we just replaced the method of control with the Bene Gesserit. And that's very like Frank Herbert-y, like his themes about mankind needs to wrest itself from these mechanisms of control, whether it's technology, whether it's spice, that single commodity that everything the universe is built on, whether it's Bene Gesserit, mentats, all of these things. We are prone to let ourselves be controlled. And his theme, broader, grander theme that's expanded on the later novels, was about making sure humanity is never in that position again. And I felt
Yeah.
like there were seeds of that in there, and I want that to be watered. So that's the little hope that is hooking me at the moment. But if you're not a Dune fan, if you're not in that deep cut lore stuff, I don't see it connecting to general audiences.
Yeah, I'm gonna wait.
It just to me, it just seems like, look, if you're gonna do this show, go all in, right? You have to go all in on the fans of the series or of the books, because those are the only people who are really going to like support this. The average casual, the average normie, like I said, it was hard enough to like understand the movies, but we did, right? Because Denny's a great director, and we got what he was trying to say. But going into something like this, where you want to get way more into the lore, you'd be better off just trying to appease the hardcore fans, and then have everyone else jump on, who are interested, then try to go for like this broad stroke and try to get everybody, hooked on the show like you did the movies. You can't do that, man, because the movies were very specific about the story they were telling. This, you're just diving into the past, and you're just, saying, hey, those witches you like from the movie, here's a whole show.
Yeah.
And it doesn't appeal to the average watcher.
Yeah.
When Frank Herbert, like the first book, when he's establishing his world, there isn't a huge lore dump, actually. You just learn the information that's necessary to continue on. We're kind of like in the mind of Paul Atreides there. He's learning as we're going too. And the exposition or just establishing the world is done through conversation. It's actually done through you're learning about the characters, and then through their conversations with each other, we're learning about the politics of the world, the landscape, and why humanity and its institutions are the way they are. They should have done that instead of this huge long lore dump in the beginning. That was a mistake. I thought. I think we should just thrust us into this story, show us like Desmond Hart, facing off with the sandworm, because that was the most interesting. Start there. Or something like that. Start with the characters, and through their perspectives and through their conversations and their journeys, we'll learn about the world itself. we can talk about the Great Revolt against machines through the different conversations. It would have been a much better way or easier way for audiences to learn about things, and instead of just this kind of boring exposition.
Yeah.
That's what I was going to ask. Who is it that I'm supposed to be following in this story? Is it Desmond Hart? Is that the main line
The
character that I'm supposed to be?
Atreides. I just know that that's who ends up winning 10,000 years from now. So I like that family.
Well, to Elaine's point, like you get more into a story when you get invested in a character. So if I can get invested in this guy, like, okay, this is the character I'm following. I want to see what happens to him. Okay, now I'm invested. And then you can lay out all of your lore and everything else that connects the dots. You can do all of that stuff through this character or through his story. But if you're just giving me a hodgepodge of mishmash, I'm like, where am I supposed to be at? Because again, I love the two films and I am really a fan of those two films. But when I got here, I'm like, I'm lost. I have
Desmond
no idea
is who
who
I
I'm
would
supposed to be
follow.
following or why.
Yeah.
Also, can we stop making shows where adults have to marry children? Like, can we just can we let that trope go? Like, I'm sorry, I know it happened back in the day, but I'm just tired of seeing adults marrying children. That's all.
It's part of the elite. They marry off their kids as early as they possibly can. It's not the normies that do that. It's only the high.
He said, I wish I was
very
younger
wealthy.
so I could rule longer.
Yeah.
Well, I'll
And that
say
little
that
toy of his was so goofy. I was like, what?
it was like a
Why
dumb
would you bring
digital
that?
effect.
What
I
are you
will
doing?
say, from a production standpoint, the wardrobe, the costumes,
Yeah,
like
that stuff
all
is
of
great.
the, and I've seen 3 episodes beyond the first one.
Does it get better?
I
Does it get
can't
better?
say it improves. There is a sex scene, so you're gonna
Booba?
get sex in Dune, but it's like the club scene in this episode. It seems so
There's a
out of
sex scene in
place.
this one.
Like, what is this?
It's so out of place. Like, this isn't Dune. This is like, generic sci-fi club in a sci-fi channel show. So I think on every level, the actors, great. The wardrobe, great. Effects, for the most part, except for that toy, I thought were great. Like, but they're all just a backdrop to like, we're going to go here to have a meeting. We're going to go here to have a meeting. Then we're going here to have a meeting. We're
There's a
going
party
here
in
to have
there.
a meeting. It's
and
it's the script that really failed this entire thing. And the premise, I forgot who mentioned it. Like, they could have focused on other aspects. This, I know, Elaine, you brought it up. That spacing guild. Can we learn what that process is? How they determine? Are they agnostic politically, and they just take the money to transport things? To, like,
And the Spacing Guild is already in play, like, so soon after the Butlerian Jihad, and they've already figured out how to use spice and like fold space and time with that. Like,
See what War Monkey said? This Space Club scene is why I dropped that Caprica show. As soon as the Space Club scene popped up, I thought, oh, this is like Caprica for a second. Like, it made me think of it.
Right.
It was a super out of place moment.
Sadly, there are far too many contemporary writers who are inspired by Ron D. Moore's Battlestar Galactica and nothing else. It's not just the Buffys and Joss Whedonism.
Yeah, no,
it's
you're
that
right.
as well, and it's poisoning because I enjoyed that Battlestar a lot, but it's like I still go back to the Glenn Larson one because there's a funness to it. I still like watching the original V series because there's still fun to that as well, and it's allegorical storytelling of how people can turn on one another for a greater power. You're not getting many writers that actually want to put in the work of going beyond that first thing that made them fall in love with the story to begin with.
Did Ron Moore do Caprica? I thought he only did BSG.
He didn't do Caprica.
No.
He did, but that is true. A lot of people try to copy the good BSG remake. But yeah, no, Caprica was this. I couldn't get through that. Like I said, because club scene and other dumb things. And also, you know what happens. We just got Battlestar Galactica. You know how it ends. Sort of the same thing here. I know how this all shakes out with Paul.
See, the sad thing is, this is what we're teaching new writers. Be like, Joss Whedon. Be like this. Be like that. Rather than be yourself. Or better yet, why not study more? Study the classics.
Well, it's ironic because actually a lot of agents, a lot of producers say find your voice, but they never find their voice. They just ape those others and try.
Or
to
they
find
don't
it
really
their own way.
mean it, and they don't really know what that means when you say find your voice.
Oh God,
Find your voices and find someone to copy that's been successful before you, and like change it just enough and say you were inspired by.
I really just do feel like this should have been a Butlerian Jihad situation, but not the Brian Herbert Butlerian Jihad. And even though Frank Herbert had never, he kind of like intimated about it, but it was never openly discussed. But there is the Dune Encyclopedia, and he didn't write the Dune Encyclopedia, but he signed off on it. Like, he was an editor of it. And there's a bunch of different like Dune fans, I think, that came together in the 70s maybe, or like early 80s, to like put this whole thing together. And in it, they have stuff about the Butlerian Jihad, and it talks about Gian Butler, and she was a Bene Gesserit, and she was pregnant, and she, you know, because she's a Bene Gesserit, she knows her fetus is good, her child is a good baby, everything's like copacetic. She goes to the hospital, she is anesthetized, she wakes up, the hospital's like, oh, we had to abort your fetus or your baby because it was really deformed, and she knows that isn't true. And then she goes to find out that like the first self-programming machine on Komos, which is the hospital director, had instituted a program of unjustified abortions. Armed with this information, she approaches the priestesses of Kubebe for their aid in creating a movement against the domination by richesse. And it's like, ooh, that's so interesting. Like, just use this. Okay.
Yeah,
like,
I can't imagine how the Butlerian Jihad being sparked off by abortion rights would have gone over.
It's not about abortion rights. It's like this fucking
I know, I'm being
computer.
facetious.
It's the state having control over the body.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Well,
personally, sorry.
once men turn their thinking over to machines in the hopes that this would set them free, but that only permitted other men with machines to enslave them. And that's the Butlerian Jihad. It's not evil fucking robots. It's just like other people using these things.
Weaponized.
They should have
AI.
started with that line. That's how they should have opened this show. If you're going to talk about the Machine Crusade, they didn't have it in the movies, in the recent film adaptation. A perfect opportunity, because that's what this show is intended to do, expand upon lore that the films didn't get to. That's a perfect opportunity to use what Reverend Mother Mahayam's conversation with Paul that they didn't use for the films, and instill it in this to set up your scene. If it's the title card says this is based on Frank Herbert's epic universe, well, that would have been a perfect way to introduce it and set the tone. If this is truly within his concepts, his mind and ideas, then you need to set that tone right. And I was just annoyed the whole time that they didn't start with that line, that men turned their thinking over to machines, that this was a philosophical, ideological conflict, that men had, through human innovation, had become lazy. They were turning over what made them human to machines, and they were doing everything for them. And this growing thought came, instilled among the masses: man may not be replaced. And that is the fire that sparked this huge war, because humans were using technology to get them to this point of this stagnation and where they weren't being human anymore. And it's so relevant what we're seeing today. So that Frank Herbert was prescient in that regard, that this is how technology can be used. ChatGPT, all of these different AI tools that are used to replace other jobs in this regard, this would have been incredibly relevant to the conversation regarding this today. Yeah.
I agree. Looking at AI and how it's going to obsolesce so many jobs in so many places.
Do you want to go to Mars or not? Because I want to go to Mars.
Well, the themes of the Butlerian Jihad would have been so more relevant now. And just in the zeitgeist, it's here. What they're dealing with in the show is not. I feel no connection to.
And it was inconsistent, because we start out with a war that looks like it's man versus machine, but then later Desmond Hart is talking about specifically that they had turned their thinking over to those machines. So that was directly from Frank Herbert, and then it was in that theme. So very inconsistent and all over the place. They're trying to do Brian Herbert stuff. They're trying to do an original story, so they're not too tied to all of this stuff. And also within keeping of the Frank Herbert's universe, and at this huge ensemble cast, it's really just became too much at this time.